What's up, guys? We are back with another video today. This time we're going to be talking about layering synths. So have you ever noticed how when you get out a synth and you start playing it, it doesn't really sound like the pros, does it? The pros synths have that fullness and that character to them. And you get yours out and you start playing around with it and it's like, what am I missing? Like, what am I doing wrong? The secret is layering. Now there's a bunch of different ways to layer synths, and I'm going to go over them. Synths, basses, etc. So strap in and get ready because we about to get it. Let's go. What's up, guys? So we are here inside the session for Glide featuring David Frank. It's a song that's coming up after coming up on my new album. And so when it comes to layering, right, the reason that the Pros sound so full and nice and big and fat is because they layer them. So the point of layering is to layer a bunch of sounds so that they sound like one sound. E.g., they sound like one element, but they're just a fuller, thicker version of that element. For example, some things that you would do this with are synths, pads, pianos, basses, anything that's like harmonic or melodic. You do layering with drums too, but that's a different conversation. So right now we're going to be talking about synths specifically. Two different ways to do it in two different contexts. So first of all, let's talk about synth layering in the context of a synth pad, right? So I have this pad right here. Let me just show you guys what it sounds like real quick.
Use your mind, leaving us without a trace, dragging me off into space. Some words are too hard to say. Use your mind.
Awesome. So if you heard that sound, right, you wouldn't think, oh, that sounds like a bunch of synths. No, it sounds like one synth, right? Because they're blended together in such a way that it sounds like one synth, but it sounds like a full, thick synth. And the reason why is because I have actually 4 different synths in here with different timbres that are taking up different parts of the frequency spectrum. And so how do you start layering? Well, I would say number one piece of advice is use your ears and not your eyes, right? So a lot of people might tell you, okay, pick a sound that's within like the 200 to 500 hertz range, and then a 500 to 1000, and then 1K to 5K, and then 5 to 10K, and so on. But for me personally, I don't really take frequencies too much into account from a visual perspective. I look at it from my ears and what am I hearing as far as the timbre of a sound, right? So the timbre is really what matters most, right? So to build this synth pad, first of all, I started out with a layer. Let's start with the lowest layer, right? So this is the low layer. And as you can hear, it's got most of the energy down here in like the 2 to 500 range. So that's like the base layer. Also, when it comes to layering, you don't want to have a lot of stuff down in the below like 500 hertz because that range can get messy really quick. When it comes to the higher frequency ranges, you can get away with having more stuff layered up there, but you really only want to have one element that's down like below 500. But it depends on the timbre, right? Like I said. So for example, the next layer just by itself is this layer, which, as you can see, it's in the same frequency range, but it's a different timbre. It has more of that sizzle, right? That's on top of it rather than this one. It's a lot duller versus this one. It has a lot more energy up here in the 2K range, right? So that's why you can get away with stacking those two sounds, even though they're overlapping in frequency, but they have different timbres, right? And then the next thing is a higher octave timbre that I have up here. And so visually, Visually, right, it tells you that this is in the same frequency range as those other two synths, so I wouldn't want to layer that. But the reason I can get away with it is because it's a different timbre, it's a different octave, and also what I've done to this layer, this high layer, is I've widened it. So I've made it wider in the stereo image so that it's not going to directly compete with the other synths. This is something that you need to take into account as well. So I got these three sounds that constitute the main meat of the pad, right? So when you play just these three layers together, it gives you a nice full sound because you have different timbres and different frequencies being represented, and it's a full spectrum sound, as we call it. It makes use of the full spectrum. Now, as this pad goes along, we introduce a new element that's kind of a moving element, right? If you hear, I'll just solo this part. As the build comes on, and see, this one has a lot of energy up in these higher frequencies, right? You can hear it and you can also see it. It's a much different timbre than all the other synths. So this is how you layer stuff bottom to top or top to bottom, however you want to start it. But use your ears, like I said. Like, don't rely on the frequency spectrum, because don't rely on an EQ, because like you don't need to be that specific with it. Like, it's okay if things overlap in frequency a little bit, but just use the timbre as like a point of reference. Use your ears and just be aware of that low range, the 2 to 500 range. Like, have one thing down there, and then everything above that you can just layer based on your ears, right? So that's one example of like a pad sound. Let's take a look at another example. Now, this is a slightly different way to layer things, but it's just as good. So this is the bass sound for my drop, right? Let's listen to it real quick. I'm gonna turn off the vocals because it's distracting. So this synth is built off of this main synth, right? There's a main synth. It's 4 layers also, but there's one synth that's doing most of the work, right? It's this one right here. So that's the synth that I started with, and that's the synth that gives the bass most of its sound and most of its character, right? So where I went from there is, first of all, this is lacking a sub, right? If you're listening on a computer or a smartphone, you're not going to hear it, but if you're listening on speakers, you can tell that there's no sub, right? So I added this sub layer. It's literally just a sub bass, and this is how I usually like to do all my basses. I just have one sub layer, and then every other layer is more of a mid-range / high frequency element, and I just have one bass taking up the low end, because like I said, the low end gets really muddy really quick. The higher frequencies, you can get away with layering a lot more stuff up there, but the lower frequencies, you've got to be really careful. So I like to just stick to one low frequency element and then the rest mid / high frequencies based on timbre, right? So like I said before, I have the main synth, and then how I added to that and beefed it up and made it thicker is I added 2 more layers. So you see, let me just go through these individually. So this next layer is Obviously, it's a much different timbre than the first one, and it has a little bit more high frequency, like that. It gives a little bit more of a pluckiness to it, right? That's what I think was missing with the original sound. Because if you listen to the original, I wanted more of like a plucky sound, so this one adds a little bit more body in mid range. Without it, with it, adds a little bit more top end, but mostly mid range. And then this last one adds a lot of top end because it's really, if I just solo this last one, it's way up there in the frequency range, right? So obviously, if you listen to all three of these synths, much different timbre, much different timbre, much different timbre. So that's the secret to layering, you guys, is picking things with different timbres in different parts of the frequency range and building your sound so that it's a full spectrum sound. So now, when I play this all together, it sounds a lot thicker and fuller and nicer than just this original sound on its own, right? And that's how the pros do it. That's how they get those nice, thick, full sounds, right? And like I was saying before, I wasn't looking at EQs or anything to layer this. I was just using my ears, picking sounds that had the frequencies that I knew were missing from the original sound, and that's how I'm building the sound. So you can do this with 2, 3, 4. I wouldn't go more than 4, but I would say 4 is like the best if you want to maximize all of your sounds, your synths and basses and everything. You should layer 4 things so that it thickens things up and gives you that nice full texture. So I hope you guys learned a lot from this video. A lot of good stuff in here. If this was helpful for you, subscribe and leave a comment. I would love to hear about it. And check out my channel for other videos and on helpful producer stuff. And I will see you in the next one. Peace out.
You got me loose and set me free.